The next thing then is food timing. Again, look, you can get caught up in the nuances of this. We could, again, spend an entire podcast series talking about this stuff, but it all comes down to basically eat 3 to 4 times per day, get a general well-balanced meal at each of those, meal opportunities, call it good. We can talk about, what should we do before training, after training, blah, blah, blah. It realistically pales in comparison to just get 3 to 4 good meals per day. You're done. See you later, right? We could maybe make an argument for tapering back calories towards the end of the day. We could make that argument and say that's a benefit, but generally that goes against most cultural practices where most people eat more at the end of the day. Most people are not eating like a huge breakfast, a smaller lunch, and then a tiny dinner. Most people are going like, a relatively small breakfast, maybe a small lunch, and then a fucking huge dinner. And we could argue that that's a bad thing, but even in that case, I would be fairly happy if someone was getting protein and carbs and fats at each of those meals, and they were just hitting their targets. I'd be like, yeah, look, cool. That's you done. You got your 3 meals per day. So 3 to 4 meals per day. That's our general recommendation. About food timing, we don't have to go too in depth onto this. Again, it's just a nothing burger to me. But what are your thoughts, Gary?
Yeah, I would agree. It's not something I pay that much attention to, really. Once I'm eating something within 1 to 3 hours of my workout, I almost always feel good, sometimes longer before, depends on the intensity of the session. And then the overall kind of eating window. Again, I do think there's merit to the idea that cutting calories off in the evening a little bit earlier is probably a wise idea. However, given that most people work morning to late afternoon / evening jobs and then go to the gym after, we do run into obstacles in people who are actively training. Most people partaking in sports generally training at 6 or 7 p.m. So it's probably a good idea from a sports nutrition principle to eat after that training session. And I don't think you're going to be dealing with deleterious health effects from that. So while there's certainly merit to the idea of cutting your eating window off a little bit in the evening, I think for a lot of people, the practical limitations might interfere with that. And I think that once you're taking care of all the other things in this podcast, I think that that's probably of minimal concern to you.
100%. And then there's on top of that, I basically advocate with a lot of my clients to set up a meal structure or a meal schedule where they just don't have to think about this stuff, right? So it kind of relates to the food timing. I just get my clients to be like, right, you have a rough eating window here. This is your breakfast period, your lunch period, your dinner, whatever makes sense for that individual. And then have a rough idea of what kind of meals make sense for you. Like, are you going to eat, I don't know, ostrich burgers and fucking quail eggs for breakfast? Most people are going to be like, no, I'm not going to eat that. That's just not a breakfast food for me. So we're going to pick some breakfast foods. We're going to be like, right, you can rotate through these so you're not just getting bored. Like some people are like, I don't mind, I'll eat the same thing every single fucking day. But a lot of people get bored with that. So let's have a few different options. What makes sense? Oh, you're rushing out the door. Do we have something that you can put together in 5 minutes? Do you have something that you can literally grab and go? Do you have something that you're like, I have a little bit more time for this meal, I want to just enjoy it, I want to like read the newspaper, whatever it is that you do we have options for that? Because if you don't have options, you don't even know, you can't even think about like, what would I do at this meal? We're going to run into trouble, right? So create those options, right? And then set a basic schedule, a basic routine for your food. This is, a basic plan of action. And this is one of those things which you'd be surprised how little people do, but actually, I'm going to shops this week. What am I going to get for my different dinners? What am I going to cook for my different dinners? People will basically just wing it, and that's fine. It keeps things, interesting, but it's very unlikely that you're going to hit your targets or that you're going to be in the best health, body composition, or reach your best performance as a result of just winging it. You need to have some sort of plan of action for your meals. And again, this is hard for some people. Like you might be listening to this and I don't know, your parents still make your dinner or your partner makes the dinner or whatever it is. You're in some sort of communal setting. I don't know, you're a fireman or something. And you're like, all right, well, at the station, whoever is on the day, they make the dinner, they make the food, they make whatever. You might not have a huge amount of control in the situation. However, you still need to create some sort of plan around that. If you're like, oh, I have less control at this meals, that means your other meals need to have more control, or rather, you need to have more control of those other meals to account for the fact that you've less control at this meal, you know? So we want to create some sort of rough schedule, some sort of rough routine. And you might think that this is one of those things where it's kind of like destroys your freedom, but ultimately, man, it gets rid of so many headaches in the diet, so much noise. If you just have a plan of action for this stuff and like a rough template, like you can forget about the nutrition and it's just on autopilot. I know people think of it the opposite way, where it's like, oh, well, it's all rigid and it's really defined and it's not enjoyable then. But honestly, thinking about what you're going to eat every single day, exhausting. You're not going to stick to any kind of diet as a result of that. Whereas if you're just like, these are breakfast foods, I just eat these foods, boom, I know I hit my targets. If I eat these foods, happy days, don't have to think about it. This is what I get for lunch. This is what I do if I'm in work, I'm going on the go. You know, you have some general like portion control method. You're like, this is roughly how much protein I need. This is roughly how much carbs I need. This is, you know, roughly fats, this, all this kind of stuff. You have an idea of what that looks like for you. You have a rough schedule, happy days. You put this stuff on autopilot. You never think about it again. Because ultimately, while we've gone through all the numbers and we've gone through all the, like, this is what you should do, ultimately, we want to create a diet where it's just on autopilot. We don't think about this. We don't have to look at what we're doing. We don't have to actively track anything. We don't have to, you know, spend a lot of our cognitive resources thinking about this stuff, because you've just put it on autopilot. Now, that does generally involve a period of time, especially initially, like spending more time tracking, spending more time really thinking about this. But the end goal should always be to have this stuff on autopilot, not think about it, and then you just get on with the stuff that actually really matters for your life, your higher purpose in this world, not just, oh yeah, how many calories do I have left today? Like, nobody cares, you know. But do you have any thoughts on that, Gary, creating this kind of rough framework and then also, you know, getting the diet to that place where it's just on autopilot?
I would very much agree. And I think that the that has always served me absolutely best, especially when anytime I'm trying to lose body fat. You know, you can become quite food focused, especially if you're already very lean, and you want to do as much to take some of the cognitive energy away from that. Okay. And if you can have your nutrition on autopilot, have a rough food structure, meal structure, daily structure, it doesn't mean that you need to have a very strict meal plan, but I think some sort of loose meal plan where you're kind of straddling between macro and calorie tracking and having some sort of structure, I think that's a very wise approach.